Hey guys, tonight we are easing into the surprisingly deep and perhaps mildly uncomfortable history of, well, what people used before soft, multi-ply toilet paper. Imagine yourself way, way back, like way back. You're out there perhaps chasing a woolly mammoth, or maybe just trying not to become lunch, and nature calls. Loudly. You look around. There's no convenient roll on a dispenser mounted just so on the wall. No little perforations to tear neatly, just nature. And you need a solution fast. You might have a spear, maybe some sturdy animal skins draped artfully, but 0 squares to spare? Yeah, you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes just dealing with the logistical challenges of basic sanitation, let alone the mammoths. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want to share where you're listening from and what time it is, drop it in the comments below. It's always cool to see where everyone is drifting off. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We're stepping back, way, way back, past the point where written records help us much, into a time when necessity was truly the mother of, well, a very specific kind of invention. You're standing there, feeling that primal urge, the sun warm on your back, the rustling leaves around you. What's your immediate impulse? You glance around. Plants are everywhere. Different shapes, different sizes, different textures. Texture. That's going to be important. Your eyes land on a large, relatively soft-looking leaf. You pick it. It feels natural, maybe a little rougher than you'd like, perhaps a bit veiny, but it's pliable. It's right there. This, my friends, is likely where it all began. The original organic single-ply solution. You use it. It does the job, after a fashion. It's not perfect. Maybe it tears. Maybe it's a little too rough. Maybe you need more than one. You try a different leaf. This one is broader, maybe a little smoother. Better? Hard to say definitively from this distance in time, but you can imagine the trial and error. Was there a preferred leaf in your particular ancient neck of the woods? The comfort leaf of the Paleolithic era? Probably depended entirely on local flora. You wouldn't find a banana leaf in Siberia, would you? Though, come to think of it, maybe that's why they invented sleds. Multi-purpose transportation and, post-transit cleanup? Okay, perhaps not. Beyond leaves, what else is readily available? If you're near a stream or river, water is an option. Cupping your hand and using water is a simple, effective method. It's cool, refreshing even, and leaves no residue in the same way plant matter might. This is a method that, interestingly, persists to this day in many parts of the world, often considered more hygienic by those who use it regularly. So, while we in the paper-using world might see it as a primitive alternative, perhaps we're the ones missing out on the truly clean experience. You stand by the water's edge, observing this possibility. The water flows, carrying everything downstream. Nature's own disposal system. What if you're not by water and the leaves are less than ideal? Maybe they're spiky or irritating, or it's winter and there are no leaves at all. You look down. Stones. Pebbles. Smooth, rounded stones from a riverbed could potentially work. You pick one up. It's cold, hard, undeniably durable. No risk of tearing here, but comfort levels? Likely 0. Efficacy? Questionable. It feels like using a geological exfoliant where you really, really don't want one. But when options are limited, a smooth stone is a solid, non-absorbent choice. You can almost hear the internal debate of early humans. Leaf, risky tear factor, stone, guaranteed discomfort but reliable. The things you have to weigh up. Then there are other natural options depending on the environment. If you're in a snowy region, maybe a handful of snow. Cold, certainly, but clean and melting away to nothing. Moss could be an option. Soft, absorbent, readily available in certain climates. You squat down and feel a patch of moss. It does feel surprisingly soft, like nature's memory foam, but for cleaning. Perhaps too soft? Not robust enough? Again, trial and error. Dry grass, corn cobs. We'll get to those later. Seashells if you're by the coast. Even sand or dirt were likely used out of sheer necessity. Think of it as an archaeological dig of personal habits. Finding fossilized leaf matter in the right place could tell us a lot, couldn't it? Historians still argue whether there was any kind of societal standard or teaching around these practices in truly ancient times, or if it was purely individual improvisation based on what was handy. Were there families known for having the best wiping stones? Did tribes have preferred hygiene leaves? It seems unlikely there were formal lessons, but perhaps observational learning played a role. A parent shows a child which leaf not to use based on unpleasant past experiences. A simple, painful lesson passed down through generations. Trust me, son, avoid the one with the little red hairs. The materials chosen would have been entirely dictated by the local ecology. A coastal community wouldn't use corn cobs. They'd use shells or smooth pebbles from the beach. A forest-dwelling group would rely on leaves and moss. A desert group? Sand, perhaps, despite its abrasive nature. Or maybe they prioritized finding water sources not just for drinking, but for washing. This geographical lottery meant that throughout prehistory, humanity was employing a vast, diverse, and largely unrecorded array of natural items for this most basic of needs. You can almost picture them spread across the globe, each group finding their own slightly different, slightly awkward way to handle the situation, united only by the fundamental requirement. It's a quiet, untold story of human ingenuity, driven by the urgent, undeniable call of nature. Fast forward a few thousand years. Humanity has built cities, developed complex societies, invented philosophy, art, and infrastructure. And with cities comes a new challenge: public sanitation. You are now walking through the bustling streets of ancient Rome or perhaps Greece. The air is thick with the smells of humanity, commerce, and maybe a hint of sewage. You need to find a facility. You head towards the public latrines, a common feature of urban life in the classical world. You step inside. It's not a row of enclosed stalls like you might be used to. Instead, you see a long bench, often made of marble, with equally spaced keyhole-shaped openings. Other people are sitting there, chatting casually. Yes, chatting. These were often social hubs, places where business might be discussed, gossip exchanged, or philosophical points debated, all while attending to necessary bodily functions. Below the seats, there's usually a channel of water, often flowing from a nearby aqueduct, designed to carry waste away into the main sewer system, like the famous Cloaca Maxima in Rome. It's efficient in a way, certainly better than just going in a ditch outside the city walls. But the question remains, what do you use to clean up? You look around. Near the water channel, or perhaps leaning against the wall, you see something interesting. It's a stick, and on the end of the stick is a sponge. This is the xylospongium, literally wood sponge. This, or similar variations, was a common tool for personal hygiene in these public facilities. You reach for one. It feels damp. Probably has been used before, and will be used again. Here's where it gets, shall we say, less comfortable by modern standards. These sponges were typically communal. Yes, you heard that right, shared. After use, you'd rinse it in the flowing water channel in front of your seat. Sometimes the sponges were kept in a bucket of water, perhaps mixed with vinegar or salt for a bit of disinfection, though how often this water was changed is anyone's guess. You rinse the sponge, shake it off, and leave it for the next person. Or maybe it was one sponge for a whole row, or even the entire room. Historians still argue whether all latrines use this communal system, or if some might have offered individual sponges, perhaps in more upscale establishments. It's hard to imagine a modern cafe having a single shared sponge next to the toilet. The Yelp reviews would be brutal. The experience itself must have been unique. Sitting shoulder to shoulder with your fellow citizens, discussing the price of grain or the latest chariot race, all while sharing a cleaning implement. It makes you appreciate the concept of privacy, doesn't it? And maybe disposable products. The sponge itself, usually natural sea sponge, would be relatively soft when wet, but the stick allowed you to keep your hand mostly clean. Mostly. You hope the flowing water really was flowing and not just stagnant. You hope the vinegar or salt solution was, in fact, doing something useful. Beyond the public latrines, what about private homes? Wealthy Romans and Greeks might have had private latrines, but they were rare. Even then, while the facility might be private, the cleaning methods were likely similar. They might have had personal sponges, perhaps of a finer quality, or used pieces of cloth or wool. But the idea of a readily available disposable material simply wasn't common. You were expected to clean and reuse. The concept of flush and forget applied only to the waste, not the cleaning tool. Beyond the public latrines, what about private homes? Wealthy Romans and Greeks might have had private latrines, but they were rare. Even then, while the facility might be private, the cleaning methods were likely similar. They might have had personal sponges, perhaps of a finer quality, or used pieces of cloth or wool. But the idea of a readily available disposable material simply wasn't common. You were expected to clean and reuse. The concept of flush and forget applied only to the waste, not the cleaning tool. There are quirky tidbits too, like inscriptions found in latrines. Some are just graffiti, others offer philosophical musings, and a few are rather rude comments about other users or even the quality of the facilities. Imagine leaving your mark, quite literally, in a place like that. It adds a strange layer to the history of these spaces. It's a reminder that even in the most undignified of locations, humans were still human. They complained, they joked, they left messages. Perhaps someone etched, "For the love of Zeus, rinse the sponge properly, Marcus." You never know. This communal sponge approach highlights a vastly different attitude towards personal space, privacy, and hygiene compared to today. While they had impressive aqueducts and sewers, their personal cleaning methods were, from our perspective, rather basic and potentially germ-laden. But within the context of their time, with limited technology and a different understanding of disease transmission, it was a practical solution for public facilities serving many people. You finish your business, give the sponge a final swish in the channel, and step back out into the Roman sunlight, slightly cleaner than before and perhaps with a new appreciation for your own private bathroom. The murmur of voices and the faint smell of the latrine fade behind you as you walk away. As the classical world and its impressive, if communally sponged, infrastructure faded, Europe entered the medieval period. Urban centers shrunk, and much of the population lived in rural areas. The sophisticated aqueducts and public latrines of Rome were largely a distant memory, or crumbling ruins. Sanitation standards, by and large, took a significant step backward from the Roman, though perhaps not Greek, approach. Where did you go when nature called in medieval Europe? Well, if you lived in the countryside, you likely just found a suitable spot outdoors. A field, a forest edge, a riverbank. The concept of a dedicated private facility was not widespread for the common person. In villages and towns, simple pit latrines or cesspits were used, often shared by multiple households or located in a communal area. These were, to put it mildly, not pleasant places. They were smelly, attracted pests, and were breeding grounds for disease, though the link between the two wasn't fully understood yet. The air around medieval settlements often had a distinct, pervasive odor that we, with our modern sewers and regular trash collection, can barely imagine. You might hold your breath as you approach the necessary spot. Now about the cleanup. The communal sponge of Rome was gone. What was most readily available? Nature still provided options. Leaves and moss, certainly, but the most common materials were often agricultural byproducts or textile waste. Hay and straw were everywhere, in bedding, in stables, on the ground. A handful of hay or straw was cheap, plentiful, and disposable. You can imagine the texture, can't you? Dry, rough, potentially scratchy, not exactly luxurious. It got the job done in the most basic sense, but comfort was clearly not a priority. It was about practicality and availability. Imagine grabbing a handful of what is essentially dried grass. It must have felt incredibly rough compared to, well, anything soft. You hope there weren't too many sharp bits. Ouch. Rags were another common option, particularly for those slightly better off, or perhaps in urban areas where textiles were more common. Pieces of old cloth, worn-out garments, or scraps from weaving could be repurposed. These would have been softer than hay, but they weren't single-use. They would be used, perhaps rinsed if water was easily accessible, which wasn't always the case, and then reused. This was a form of recycling, though born more out of necessity than environmental consciousness. You might have a small collection of rags dedicated to this purpose, perhaps kept in a specific spot near the privy. The thought of washing them? Well, let's just say laundry day had its unique challenges. In castles, the nobility had a slightly more sophisticated system with garderobes. These were essentially vertical shafts built into the castle walls, with a seat over the opening. They would empty directly into the moat, if there was one, or a cesspit below. The idea was that the draft coming up the shaft would deter moths from eating the clothes stored in the small room. Hence the name garderobe, related to wardrobe. A rather optimistic and likely ineffective method of moth-proofing, but a slightly more private toilet. What did the lords and ladies use? Likely rags or perhaps pieces of wool. Still a far cry from anything resembling paper. The concept of personal hygiene was very different. While Romans had their bathhouses, public bathing declined in popularity in medieval Europe, partly due to changing social customs and later, unfounded fears during outbreaks of plague that water could open pores to disease. Washing the entire body was less frequent, and cleaning after using the privy was often a quick affair with whatever material was at hand. Historians still argue whether the decline in sanitation standards contributed significantly to the frequency and severity of disease outbreaks in medieval cities, though the link between poor hygiene and health seems obvious to us today. It certainly didn't help matters. Communal habits extended beyond shared privies. The general lack of emphasis on personal cleanliness meant that shared spaces, tools, and even interactions carried a higher risk of transmitting germs. Your handshake, your shared eating bowl, the bench you sat on, all potentially less sanitary than you'd prefer. It makes you appreciate soap, doesn't it? And disinfectant. And the simple act of washing your hands, a practice that wasn't as ingrained or understood in the way it is now. So, picture yourself in a medieval village. You step behind a bush or head towards the communal pit. You reach for a handful of straw, it's prickly. It smells faintly of the stable. You use it, dispose of it in the pit, or simply leave it on the ground to decompose. It's rough, it's ready, and it's the reality for most people. No soft tissues, no flushable wipes, just the raw materials of the earth and whatever scraps of cloth you might possess. A far less comfortable and arguably less hygienic experience than the communal sponge of Rome, let alone our modern comforts. You dust off your hands as best you can and get back to your day, trying not to dwell on the less pleasant necessities of life. Leaving the rough textures and communal pits of medieval Europe behind, let's drift eastward to a land far ahead of its time in many ways. While Europeans were still figuring out the least uncomfortable way to use a handful of hay, a revolutionary invention had taken root in China centuries earlier: paper. You might know the story. Traditionally credited to Kai Lun in 105 AD, though archaeological evidence suggests earlier forms existed. This invention changed the world, first for writing, art, and record-keeping. Paper was a precious commodity made from materials like mulberry bark, hemp, and rags processed with care. You wouldn't dream of wasting it on something disposable. Or would you? While paper's primary uses were certainly intellectual and artistic, practical applications began to emerge. And yes, eventually this remarkable material found its way to fulfilling a very basic human need. Historical records indicate that paper was being used for hygiene purposes in China much earlier than anywhere else. By the Tang Dynasty, 7th to 10th centuries, there are mentions of paper being used for cleaning. But it was during the Yuan Dynasty, 14th century, that we find rather astonishing evidence of its scale. Records from the imperial court of Emperor Hongwu in 1393 detail an annual supply of 720,000 sheets of paper, each sheet 2 by 3 feet, for the general use of the imperial family and the court. And for the emperor alone, a further 15,000 sheets of special, softer paper was provided, perfumed for good measure. Imagine that for a moment, while you across the world were perhaps contemplating the pros and cons of a particularly stiff piece of straw. The Chinese emperor was using thousands upon thousands of sheets of perfumed paper. It's a stark contrast in hygiene technology, isn't it? This large-scale production and use of paper specifically for hygienic purposes by the imperial court is a quirky tidbit that really highlights the divergent paths of East and West for a long time. It wasn't quite the perforated rolls we know, but it was undeniably paper, manufactured for this specific personal use. This demonstrates that once paper became more widely available, even if still relatively expensive, its potential for hygiene was recognized. It was softer than many natural materials, more convenient than rinsing rags, and certainly more pleasant than a rough stone. You can picture the palace eunuchs managing the supply, ensuring the emperor's perfumed paper was always well stocked. A quiet, essential service in the vast machinery of the imperial court. Historians still argue whether this practice was common outside the imperial court and wealthy elites in China during this period, or if the vast majority of the population continued to rely on more traditional materials like leaves, water, or bamboo scrapers. Evidence suggests that while paper was available, its cost likely kept it out of reach for everyday hygienic use by the common person for many more centuries. So, while the emperor enjoyed his luxurious perfumed sheets, the peasant in the field was probably still reaching for a large leaf. Other parts of Asia had their own methods. In Japan, before paper became common for this use, people sometimes used small wooden or bamboo sticks called chugi. These were rounded or flattened ends used with water. Imagine carefully scraping clean with a small wooden tool. Different texture altogether, like a tiny, less comfortable spatula. The adoption of paper for hygiene spread from China to other parts of East Asia over time, influenced by trade and cultural exchange, but it wasn't an overnight phenomenon. The materials available locally still played a huge role. The early paper used wasn't necessarily like modern tissue. It could be quite coarse depending on how it was made. The softening and multiplying techniques came much later. So while it was a massive leap forward from hair rags, it wasn't the pillowy cloud we might think of today. Still, the mere concept of using a dedicated, relatively soft, compared to alternatives, disposable material for this purpose was groundbreaking. It shows a line of technological development focused on personal comfort and hygiene that was unique to this part of the world for centuries. So, as you imagine the rustling of those large sheets of paper in the emperor's palace, or the slightly more awkward scraping with a bamboo stick in ancient Japan, you appreciate the quiet innovation happening in the East. While Europe was stuck in the era of roughage, Asia was already exploring the potential of paper for personal cleanliness. It's a small, often overlooked detail in the grand sweep of history, but one that profoundly impacted daily life, at least for those who could afford it. The thought of perfumed paper for the emperor is a strange, fascinating footnote in the long quest for post-privy comfort. Moving across continents and cultures once more, we find ourselves in the vibrant, scholarly world of the Islamic Golden Age, roughly contemporary with Europe's medieval period, but with a markedly different approach to personal cleanliness. While different parts of the world were experimenting with dried plants or early forms of paper, a significant portion of humanity adhered to practices where water was, and remains, the cornerstone of post-toilet hygiene. In Islamic tradition, cleanliness is a deeply ingrained religious and cultural imperative. Practices known as tahara, purification, are essential before prayer, and a key part of this involves cleaning oneself after using the toilet. This cleansing is called istinja, and the preferred, most recommended method, according to religious texts and long-standing tradition, is using water. You encounter this cultural norm and realize that the primary tool here isn't a material to wipe with, but a liquid to wash with. Imagine you are in a household or a public facility in, say, Baghdad or Cordoba during this period. Near the squat toilet or simple hole in the ground, you would likely find a source of water. This could be a small stream, a basin, or most commonly a spouted pot or jug designed for this purpose. These pots have different names depending on the region: a lota in the Indian subcontinent or an ibrik in the Middle East. You fill the pot with water. The process involves using the water to wash the area, typically using the left hand. In Islamic culture, the left hand is traditionally designated for cleaning the body, including after using the toilet, while the right hand is used for eating, shaking hands, and other social interactions. This distinction is taught from childhood and is a fundamental aspect of personal hygiene. So, you hold the water pot with your right hand, pour water, and use your left hand to cleanse. The water washes away impurities, leaving you feeling, proponents argue, much cleaner than just wiping alone. This emphasis on water meant that even basic facilities were designed to incorporate a water source. Private homes, public baths, which were also common and important social centers, unlike the decline in Europe, and roadside facilities would have provisions for water. This is a stark contrast to the dry methods prevalent elsewhere. While some porous materials like stones, dried earth, or even paper, as it became available, were sometimes used before water to remove bulk, water was always the preferred and often required final cleansing agent. The idea was to use something solid first, then follow up with water for thorough cleaning. Think of it as a two-step process, where the second step is the most important. This practice has deep roots and is based on interpretations of religious texts. It's not just about physical cleanliness, but also spiritual purity required for prayer. The feeling of using cool water to wash must have been incredibly refreshing and thorough compared to the rough alternatives. You can almost feel the difference. It's a different kind of clean, one that many who practice it find superior to wiping alone. Historians still argue whether the practice of using materials before water was universal, or if it varied based on local custom, wealth, and the availability of materials like paper or stones. Some accounts suggest that water alone was sufficient and primary from the earliest times, while others indicate that a dry material might be used first if available. However, the central, undeniable fact is the strong cultural and religious preference for water as the ultimate cleansing agent. The prevalence of bidets in many parts of the world today, including in countries with significant Muslim populations, can be seen as a modern evolution of this ancient practice. While the bidet as a fixture was developed in Europe much later, the concept of using water to wash after using the toilet is something that has been common practice in the Islamic world for over 1,000 years. You see a modern bidet attachment and realize it's not a new, strange invention, but a continuation of a very old, very effective method of cleaning. There are quirky tidbits too, like descriptions from medieval travelers visiting the Islamic world who were surprised by these hygiene practices, so different from their own. They might have found the use of the left hand for cleaning strange, or the constant presence of water pots in toilet areas unusual. It highlights the cultural disconnects that even basic daily routines can reveal. Imagine trying to explain to someone who'd only ever known hay or rags why you're pouring water and using your hand. It would seem odd to them, just as their methods might seem insufficient to you. So, as you imagine the sound of water pouring from a spouted jug in a quiet courtyard latrine, or the feel of cool water providing a thorough cleanse, you appreciate this alternative approach. It's a system built on religious conviction and practicality, prioritizing a wet clean over a dry wipe. It demonstrates that while the need for hygiene is universal, the methods developed to achieve it can be incredibly diverse, shaped by culture, religion, and available resources. And for many, water has always been the purest path to cleanliness. Now, let's travel across the vast ocean, long before the arrival of Europeans, to the diverse landscapes of the Americas. Here, across vast continents home to myriad cultures, from the sophisticated city-states of the Maya and Aztecs to the sprawling Inca Empire and the varied tribes of North America, the approach to personal hygiene, particularly after using the toilet, also relied heavily on what nature provided, much like the earliest humans globally. But they had their own unique regional favorites. You find yourself in a maize field in Mesoamerica, the rustling stalks taller than your head. Corn, or maize, was the staple crop for millions across these continents, a gift from the earth that sustained civilizations. And as you look around, you see not just the cobs, heavy with kernels, but also the dry, stripped cobs from last season, scattered on the ground or collected. These humble objects, left over after the edible part was consumed, served a remarkably practical secondary purpose. Yes, we're talking about corn cobs as a cleaning implement. This is perhaps one of the most famous, almost iconic examples of a natural toilet paper substitute. Why corn cobs? They were readily available in societies built on maize agriculture. They had a shape that was relatively easy to handle. And the texture, well, imagine the texture. It's not smooth. It's bumpy, fibrous, and offers a certain exfoliating quality, perhaps. It's the ultimate in agricultural waste recycling. You finish eating your corn on the cob, and later the cob finds a new, less delicious purpose. Talk about zero waste. You pick one up. It's dry, lightweight, and surprisingly sturdy. It feels rough against your hand. You think about the practicality. No need to manufacture anything, just use what's left over from dinner. It's ingeniously simple. But corn cobs weren't the only option. Just like elsewhere in the world, large leaves were widely used. Maize leaves themselves are broad and flexible. Other plants provided suitable foliage depending on the local flora. Moss, particularly in damper, forested regions, would have offered a softer alternative, much like in other parts of the world. If you were near a river or lake, water was certainly used either by itself or perhaps in conjunction with other materials, though the strong cultural and religious emphasis on water as the primary cleaner seen in the Islamic world might not have been as universal here. You might see someone washing their hands and body in a stream after using the riverbank as a latrine. In more organized settlements and cities like the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan, which was built on an island in a lake, sanitation was handled differently. They had impressive systems of canals that served for transportation, but also for waste removal. Human waste was collected and used as fertilizer, demonstrating an advanced understanding of resource management. But even with sophisticated waste disposal, the personal cleaning after using the privy still relied on available materials like corn cobs, leaves, or water. Similarly, the Incas had well-maintained road systems and possibly designated spots along them, but the immediate cleaning tools would have been whatever natural items were at hand in the Andean landscape. Perhaps tough mountain grasses or specific leaves. Historians still argue whether the use of corn cobs was the most common method across all maize-growing regions, or if certain social classes or specific locales preferred other materials like particular types of leaves or utilized water more extensively. Archaeological finds sometimes include preserved plant matter or even modified cobs in areas identified as latrines, providing clues, but a complete picture of daily hygiene practices for everyone from emperor to farmer is hard to piece together. Was there a technique to selecting the right cob? Smoothness preferences? Did kids learn which leaves were safe and which were irritating? Probably lessons learned through uncomfortable experience, passed down through generations. There are some quirky tidbits from early European chroniclers who sometimes remarked on the hygiene practices of the indigenous peoples, often with a mix of fascination and misunderstanding, viewed through their own European lens of rags and infrequent bathing. These accounts, though biased, sometimes offer glimpses into the materials used and the habits observed. So, as you imagine yourself in a pre-Columbian American landscape, perhaps tending a maize field or walking along an Inca road, and you feel that familiar urge, you know your options are natural ones. You might reach for a dry corn cob, feeling its unique, bumpy texture, or perhaps a broad, cool leaf, or make your way to a nearby stream. It's a system dictated by the environment, practical and resource efficient, relying on the bounty of nature itself. It's a world without manufactured goods for this purpose, where necessity and ingenuity led to the resourceful use of agricultural leftovers and readily available plant life. And you realize that for thousands of years, the corn cob held a quiet, essential place in the history of human hygiene in the Americas. Now, let's journey to the vast and varied continent of Africa, a land of incredible geographical diversity, from scorching deserts to dense rainforests, sweeping savannas to fertile river valleys. This immense environmental variation, coupled with a rich tapestry of cultures and kingdoms that rose and fell over millennia, meant that hygiene practices were just as diverse. There wasn't one single African way to handle post-toilet cleanup, but rather a multitude of approaches shaped by local availability and cultural norms. What was consistently available where nature permitted was plant life and, crucially, water. Like the earliest humans everywhere, people across Africa utilized the natural materials around them. Depending on whether you were in a lush forest or a drier savanna, your options would differ dramatically. Large, soft leaves were certainly a common choice in many regions, providing a readily available and relatively gentle option. You might learn which leaves were best, perhaps those with a slightly fuzzy texture, or those that were particularly large and pliable. It was a localized knowledge passed down through generations. In grasslands, tough grasses or other fibrous plant materials might be used, though these could be less comfortable. In rocky or arid regions, smooth stones or pebbles, similar to those potentially used in early global history, would have been practical, if not exactly luxurious. You could scour for the perfect, most comfortable stone, a small geological tool for personal care. Sand or earth might also be used out of necessity in very dry areas, though the abrasive nature makes this sound like a last resort. Imagine using sand like a very, very rough sandpaper. Definitely not a multiply experience. Perhaps even more significant across many parts of Africa was the use of water. Access to rivers, lakes, and streams meant that washing with water, often using the hand, again, frequently the left hand, a practice common in many cultures globally, not just Islamic ones, was a prevalent method. This could be done directly in the water source or by carrying water in a gourd or pot to a more private spot. The feel of cool water in a hot climate must have been incredibly soothing and effective for cleaning. This water-based approach highlights a preference for washing over wiping in many African cultures, a practice that continues to this day in many regions. You hear the gentle lapping of water against a riverbank, and imagine the simple effectiveness of a water rinse. Historically, even in large, complex urban centers like those of the Mali Empire, the Swahili coast city-states, or kingdoms around the Great Lakes, while waste disposal systems might have existed, simple pits, designated areas, personal cleaning methods still relied on these basic, available resources. We don't have detailed plumbing diagrams from ancient Timbuktu or descriptions of privies from Great Zimbabwe in the same way we do for Rome, but archaeological context and cultural continuity suggest reliance on natural materials and water. Historians still argue whether the emphasis on water use in parts of Africa, particularly North Africa and the Swahili coast, was solely an indigenous development driven by climate and resource availability, or if it was significantly influenced by cultural exchange with the Islamic world, where water-based cleansing is also central. It's likely a complex mix of both, with local traditions adapting or reinforcing practices encountered through trade and interaction. A quirky tidbit might involve learning about specific plants used in certain communities. Perhaps a plant with naturally antimicrobial properties, or one whose leaves were particularly well suited in shape and texture. While detailed records are scarce, Anthropological studies of more recent traditional practices often shed light on the ingenious ways different plant species were utilized for various daily needs, including hygiene. You wonder if there was a specific plant equivalent of extra soft in the botanical world of ancient Africa. Imagine you are in a village in a savanna region. You step away from the huts towards a designated area. You look around and select a few large, sturdy leaves from a nearby plant, or perhaps you head towards the stream carrying a small calabash gourd for water. Your choice depends on what's available and what you were taught. There's a quiet efficiency in using what the earth provides, a direct connection to your environment that's absent when you simply unroll a manufactured product. This reliance on diverse natural materials and the prevalent use of water across historical Africa demonstrate ingenuity and adaptation to varying environments. It's a history written not in grand buildings or complex machines, but in the quiet, daily practices of millions, utilizing the resources of a vast and fertile continent for the most fundamental of human needs. And as you picture these varied scenes, you appreciate the simple practicality and the enduring connection to nature that defined hygiene for so long in this part of the world. Leaving the diverse natural solutions of Africa and pausing our thoughts on the water-centric practices, we return now to Europe, advancing into the early modern period, roughly from the 15th through the 18th centuries. This era saw significant changes in art, science, and exploration, but daily sanitation for the average person often remained surprisingly basic. While some larger houses and palaces might have slightly more built-in facilities than medieval castles, the ubiquitous pit latrine, the chamber pot, and the simple practice of discarding waste into rivers or street gutters were still very much a part of life, particularly in burgeoning towns and cities. So, what was the material of choice for personal cleaning during this time? With an increase in textile production thanks to developments in weaving and spinning, fabric scraps and old rags became the dominant solution across much of Europe. You would finish using the privy or empty your chamber pot into the designated, often unpleasant spot, and then reach for a piece of cloth. Imagine collecting these rags. They came from worn-out clothing, old bed linens, curtains, or offcuts from tailors and seamstresses. Nothing was wasted if it could serve a purpose, and personal hygiene was a very practical purpose indeed. You would gather a supply of these fabric pieces, perhaps storing them in a basket or on a hook near the privy area. The feel of the cloth would vary depending on its origin. Rough linen from peasant smocks, softer wool from a worn-out cloak, perhaps even a piece of silk if you were very wealthy, though that seems like an incredible luxury for such a use. You select a piece. It's probably not pristine. It might be stained, frayed, certainly not fresh from the loom, but it's softer than hay and more substantial than many leaves. Here's the less comfortable part by modern standards. These rags were not typically single-use. They were reusable. After use, you might rinse the rag in water if a source was conveniently located near the privy, perhaps in a bucket or a nearby stream. Then the rag would be set aside to dry. Periodically, these soiled rags would be washed. But laundry was an arduous task in this era, involving heating large amounts of water, using harsh lye-based soaps, and a lot of physical labor. As a result, laundry wasn't done frequently, especially for poorer households. Your personal hygiene rags were likely washed infrequently, sharing a pot with other household linens on a dedicated wash day. The thought of repeatedly using and only occasionally washing a cloth for this purpose is perhaps one of the starkest contrasts with our modern disposable culture. You might have a few rags in rotation, hoping they dried properly between uses. The smell, the potential for lingering, everything, is something we try not to dwell on today. It makes you appreciate the sheer convenience and perceived cleanliness of a fresh sheet of paper every single time. Imagine explaining our concept of throwing away perfectly good, albeit used cloth, to someone from the 17th century. They'd think it was utterly wasteful. Wasteful? But you can just wash it, they might exclaim, holding up a dubious-looking rag. This reliance on rags highlights Europe's slower adoption of paper for hygiene compared to China. Paper was available in Europe during this period, but it was primarily used for printing and writing, remaining a relatively expensive commodity. The idea of using it for something disposable like personal cleaning was considered frivolous or prohibitively costly for most people. So while the Chinese emperor was using perfumed paper centuries earlier, you in early modern Europe were probably just hoping your rag supply held out until the next infrequent laundry day. Historians still argue whether the infrequent washing of these rags, combined with poor general sanitation, contributed significantly to the spread of diseases during this period. While correlation isn't always causation, it seems intuitively obvious that reusing soiled cloths could easily spread pathogens. Yet it was the accepted norm, a practical solution born from the economics and technology of the time. There are quirky tidbits, like mentions in household inventories of specific cloths or rags designated for hygiene purposes. Sometimes particular types of fabric were preferred. Perhaps old linen was considered softer than wool or easier to rinse. The very fact that rags were valuable enough to be collected and used for this purpose, and even sold to rag-and-bone men, who would then sell them on for papermaking, tells you something about the economy of waste in this era. Your used hygiene rag could literally end up as a page in a book, a strange cycle of repurposing. So, as you picture yourself in a small, dimly lit room in early modern Europe, reaching for a piece of recycled cloth, you appreciate the simple, albeit unsanitary, practicality of the era. It was a system based on reuse and making do with what was available, a testament to the ingenuity born of necessity, even if it falls far short of our modern standards of comfort and cleanliness. The feel of the worn fabric, the faint smell, the knowledge that it will be used again. It's a quiet, slightly uncomfortable moment in the long history of personal hygiene, defined by the humble, hard-working rag. While the vast majority of people in early modern Europe were making do with recycled rags of questionable softness and uncertain cleanliness, life, as it often does, offered a different experience for the aristocracy and the wealthy elite. Money bought comfort, and in matters of personal hygiene, it certainly allowed for a slightly more refined and perhaps slightly less fragrant approach. You find yourself now in a grand manor house or a bustling palace. The fundamental need is the same, and the underlying sanitation infrastructure, chamber pots, basic privies, or guardrobes, might not be radically different in concept from those of the common folk, just perhaps grander in their setting, or more frequently emptied by servants. But when it came time for personal cleaning, the materials used were on an entirely different level. Forget rough linen or scratchy wool scraps. If you were a member of the aristocracy, you would be using much finer fabrics. Soft, worn-in linen was a standard, chosen for its absorbency and relative gentleness. As cotton became more available, though initially expensive in Europe, its inherent softness made it a highly desirable material for personal cloths. You could imagine reaching for a piece of fine cotton fabric, perhaps from an old discarded undergarment or a piece of salvaged shirting. It would feel significantly softer against the skin than the coarse rags used by laborers or farmers. This difference in texture alone must have been a small but significant daily luxury. And then there was the added touch. Scent. In an era where unpleasant odors were simply a part of life, masking them was a key concern for those who could afford it. Wealthy individuals sometimes had their hygiene cloths subtly scented. This wasn't necessarily a strong perfume, but perhaps a gentle fragrance applied to the cloth itself, or the water used for rinsing. Imagine a faint hint of rose water or lavender emanating from your personal wiping cloth. It wouldn't eliminate the source of the odor, of course, but it might make the immediate experience slightly more palatable. It's a quirky tidbit that highlights the lengths the wealthy went to for comfort and to distance themselves from the smells associated with the less fortunate. You picture a servant carefully folding scented linen squares, a strange task in the opulent setting of a noble's private closet. These finer cloths would still have been laundered and reused. The concept of disposable fabric was still decades, even centuries away for most. However, the wealthy likely had a larger supply of these cloths, and their laundry might have been done slightly more often, or perhaps with access to better soaps or more abundant water. Historians still argue whether these more frequent, relative to the poor washings, combined with the use of potentially cleaner materials, led to genuinely better health outcomes for the aristocracy, or if the prevailing poor public sanitation negated any benefits of their personal practices. Disease didn't strictly respect class boundaries. The private facilities available to the wealthy, while basic by modern standards, offered more dignity than communal pits or simply going outdoors. A small closet containing a chamber pot or a designated room with a privy seat provided privacy. The chamber pots themselves might be made of fine porcelain or silver, perhaps with lids to contain odors, and would be emptied regularly by servants whose specific, unenviable job it was to do so. You hear the discreet cough of a servant outside the door, waiting to whisk away the offending pot. This contrast between the classes is a powerful illustration of how even the most fundamental aspects of human life are shaped by economic status. While the peasant worried about splinters from straw or the roughness of a well-used rag, the aristocrat might muse on whether their linen was quite soft enough, or if the lavender scent on their wiping cloth was adequately masking the inevitable odors. It was a different world, even in the most private of moments. So, as you settle into the imagined comfort of a wealthy 17th century European home, you reach for a piece of soft, perhaps faintly scented linen. It's a small luxury, a mark of status in a world where basic hygiene was often harsh and smelly. The feel of the smooth fabric, the subtle fragrance, it's a brief privileged moment in the long history of cleaning up, a quiet testament to the fact that even then money could buy you a slightly more comfortable wipe. You fold the cloth, place it in the designated spot for soiled linens, and step away, leaving the scented privacy behind. Leaving the perfumed world of the aristocracy and the reusable rag behind, we move closer to the modern age and the eventual widespread adoption of paper for hygiene in the West. For centuries, as we've seen, Europe lagged far behind Asia in this particular application of paper technology. While China had been using paper for cleaning since at least the 14th century, in Europe, paper remained primarily for printing, writing, and packaging, well into the 18th and 19th centuries. Rags, water, where available and culturally preferred, and various natural materials remained the norm. But the mid-19th century saw the stirrings of change, particularly in the United States. As cities grew and printing became cheaper, new possibilities emerged, and one individual is often credited with the first attempt to commercialize a dedicated paper product for toilet use in the West, Joseph Gaiety. In the 1850s, Gaiety introduced Gaiety's medicated paper for the water closet. Imagine seeing an advertisement for this product. It must have seemed novel, perhaps even a little shocking, given the prevailing habits. Gaiety's paper wasn't sold on a roll. It came in flat sheets packaged in boxes. Each sheet was infused with aloe, advertised as a way to prevent hemorrhoids. The packaging proudly displayed Gaiety's name, ensuring no one could ignore what the product was for. You see the box, the explicit description, and perhaps feel a blush rising. Buying it required a certain boldness or perhaps desperation for relief. Gaiety's invention was a mainstream historical first in terms of commercial production and marketing in the West, but it wasn't an overnight sensation. Why? Several reasons. Firstly, it was expensive compared to the free or cheap alternatives people were already using. And what were those alternatives? Primarily, rags continued to be used by many, but increasingly with the rise of printing, old newspapers, magazines, and especially mail-order catalogs became popular choices. You finish reading the news or browse the latest products, and then the paper served a second, very different purpose. Catalogs with their relatively soft paper and convenient size were particularly favored. You might have a Sears Roebuck catalog hanging in the privy, ready for use. This widespread practice of using old printed material meant Gaiety's product faced stiff competition from essentially free options. Furthermore, there was a social stigma attached to buying a product specifically for this purpose. Personal hygiene after using the toilet was a private matter, not something openly discussed or purchased with fanfare. Asking a shopkeeper for Gaiety's medicated paper might have felt incredibly awkward. You picture the scene: a hushed request, a quick transaction, the box concealed in a bag? Historians still argue whether Gaiety's was truly the absolute first paper ever used for this in the West, or merely the first commercial product. It's possible individuals had experimented with using paper before, perhaps scraps from printers or other sources. However, Gaiety was the one who took it from a potential improvisation to a manufactured product. The quirky tidbit here is the medicated aspect, the focus on health benefits, trying to appeal to a perceived need for something beyond just cleaning, linking hygiene to wellness in a way that resonates even today. The aloe infusion was meant to be soothing, a selling point in an era where discomfort was common. Despite its slow start, Gaiety's paper planted the seed. It introduced the idea of a purpose-made, disposable paper product for toilet use to the Western market. It was a small step, literally one flat sheet at a time, but it paved the way for the massive industry that would eventually develop. You hold a sheet of Gaiety's imagined paper. It feels different from newsprint, perhaps a little thicker, maybe a faint smell of aloe. It's not soft like modern tissue, but it's a deliberate product, designed for a specific, necessary task. This period marks the beginning of the transition in the West from reusing materials or using readily available discards like newspapers towards the concept of a manufactured, disposable hygiene product. It was a slow, awkward start, met with hesitation and competition from established, albeit less sanitary habits. But the idea was out there, a quiet revolution waiting to happen, one medicated sheet at a time. You put the imagined sheet back in its box, recognizing it as a significant, if not immediately successful, ancestor of modern toilet paper. Gaiety planted the seed with his medicated sheets, but the real revolution in Western hygiene paper needed the power and scale of industrialization and a key innovation: the roll. As the 19th century wore on and manufacturing techniques improved, paper production became cheaper and more efficient. The stage was set for toilet paper as we know it to begin its quiet, essential takeover. The turning point, the moment when toilet paper began its journey to becoming a ubiquitous household item, is often credited to the Scott Paper Company in Philadelphia. While others may have experimented with paper products, Scott, originally a company selling paper bags, began selling rolls of toilet paper in the 1890s. This was the game changer: paper on a roll, with perforations between the sheets. Imagine the difference this made. No longer fumbling with loose sheets from a box or tearing pages from a newspaper. Now you had a continuous supply on a cardboard tube, eventually neatly divided into individual, easy-to-tear portions. You simply pull and rip. That satisfying little tearing sound, a precursor to the modern perforations, was a signal of convenience and progress. The roll itself was practical, easy to hang or place within reach in the water closet or outhouse. This simple piece of engineering, the perforated roll, solved several practical problems at once and set the standard for over a century. Despite the practicality, the product still faced that lingering social awkwardness. Remember how people were embarrassed to buy Gaiety's sheets? That didn't disappear overnight. The Scott Paper Company understood this and initially employed a clever marketing strategy, a quirky tidbit in the history of retail. They didn't put their name on the rolls. Instead, they sold large rolls of paper to pharmacists, who would then re-roll it into smaller rolls and sell it to their customers under their own drugstore's brand name. This allowed customers to buy it discreetly from their local pharmacist, avoiding the potential embarrassment of asking for Scott toilet paper directly. It was toilet paper sold incognito, a silent transaction for a product that dare not speak its name too loudly. You picture the pharmacist, perhaps with a knowing nod, wrapping up your anonymous roll. The paper itself in these early rolls wasn't the soft, multi-ply tissue we're used to today. It was likely coarser, probably unbleached or minimally bleached, utilitarian paper. Think of it as a less refined version of brown paper bag material, perforated and rolled. Comfort was secondary to functionality and affordability, but it was a dedicated product, designed specifically for hygiene, a significant step up from newspaper ink or questionable rags for many. The industrial process meant large paper machines producing wide rolls, which were then cut, perforated, and rolled into the smaller cylinders we recognize. Factories dedicated to this purpose began to emerge, quietly contributing to a revolution in personal cleanliness. While the switch wasn't immediate for everyone, rags and newspapers persisted, especially for the poor. The availability of relatively affordable purpose-made paper on a convenient roll started to shift habits. Historians still argue whether Scott was definitively the first to sell toilet paper on a roll, as other companies might have been experimenting around the same time. However, Scott is widely credited with popularizing the format and playing a crucial role in its widespread adoption in the United States. The primary reason for its eventual acceptance seems to be a combination of increasing affordability due to mass production, the undeniable convenience of the roll and perforations, and a gradual shift in societal attitudes towards hygiene and the use of disposable products. The germ theory of disease gaining traction in the late 19th and early 20th centuries likely also played a role, subtly suggesting that reusable materials might not be the most sanitary option. So, as you imagine the clatter of early paper machinery and the quiet, steady production of these perforated rolls, you witness the birth of modern toilet paper. It wasn't soft yet, it wasn't colorful, and it was sometimes bought in hushed tones from a pharmacist, but it was on a roll, ready to be torn. It was the beginning of the end for the reign of rags and newspapers in the Western toilet, a quiet industrial revolution that would fundamentally change a daily habit for billions. You unroll a small piece of the imagined early paper, feel its roughness, and appreciate the simple genius of the perforated roll. Once toilet paper was successfully on a roll, its journey wasn't complete. The basic utilitarian paper of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, while convenient, left much to be desired in terms of comfort. The next major phase in the history of this humble product was the quest for softness, a period that could perhaps be called the Softness Wars. The first and arguably most crucial step in improving comfort was the removal of splinters. Yes, you heard that right. Early toilet paper, often made from wood pulp using less refined processes, could contain tiny splinters. Imagine that experience. It adds a whole new layer of appreciation for modern, smooth paper, doesn't it? The public was understandably not thrilled with this feature, and manufacturers quickly worked to refine their processes, grinding the pulp more finely and using different wood sources to eliminate the splinter problem entirely. The sigh of relief across the nation when splinter-free toilet paper became the norm must have been palpable. This was a major mainstream fact in the evolution of the product. The move from simply being paper to being non-injurious paper. With the splinters gone, the focus shifted squarely to making the paper softer. This became a major point of competition between manufacturers throughout the 20th century, particularly from the mid-century onwards. Companies invested heavily in research and development to improve paper-making techniques, experimenting with different fibers, pulping processes, and finishes. The introduction of multi-ply paper was a significant innovation. One layer is okay, but 2 layers? Or even 3 or 4? This added thickness and cushioning, dramatically increasing both softness and strength. You feel the difference between a flimsy single-ply sheet and a thick, plush multi-ply one. It's a tangible improvement in daily comfort. Beyond just adding plies, manufacturers introduced other features aimed at enhancing softness and absorbency. Quilting and embossing patterns were pressed into the paper, creating little pockets of air for a softer feel, and helping the layers hold together. Later came the addition of lotions or scents directly to the paper, adding another layer of sensory experience. Imagine a toilet paper that not only feels soft, but also smells faintly of flowers or feels slightly moisturized. These were attempts to elevate the product beyond mere utility into something that offered a touch of luxury or care? Advertising played a huge role in this evolution. Companies ran campaigns emphasizing the softness of their paper, often featuring images of babies or soft, fluffy animals to create an emotional connection. They convinced consumers that softness wasn't just a luxury, but a sign of quality and care for your family. The toilet paper aisle, once a simple choice between a few basic rolls, became a bewildering array of options based on ply count, texture, absorbency, and perceived softness. And then there's a quirky tidbit that is particularly evocative of mid-20th century aesthetics: colored toilet paper. Starting in the 1950s and popular for a few decades, toilet paper was sold in pastel shades of pink, blue, yellow, and green. The idea was that your toilet paper could match your bathroom decor, your sink, your tub, your tiles. It seems strange now in an age where white or sometimes natural brown dominates the market, but for a time, your toilet paper could be a fashion statement. You picture a bathroom decked out in matching avocado green fixtures and coordinating green toilet paper. A design choice rooted in the specific taste of the era, turning a functional item into a decorative one. Historians still argue whether the intense focus on softness and the proliferation of features like color and scent were driven purely by consumer demand for comfort, or primarily by manufacturers seeking to differentiate their product and create perceived value through clever marketing. While comfort is undeniably nice, the question remains how much functional benefit there is beyond a certain point of softness, or if we were simply sold on the idea of needing ever softer paper. So, as you contemplate the modern toilet paper aisle with its dizzying array of options, you appreciate the journey. From rough rags and splintery single-ply, we move to multi-ply softness, fancy patterns, and even colors. It was a quest driven by comfort, competition, and clever marketing, transforming a basic necessity into a product with surprising complexity and a rich, if slightly silly, history of innovation. You feel the soft texture of a modern sheet, a testament to a century of refinement, and drift deeper into comfort. While the West was engaged in the softness wars, developing ever more luxurious and colorful paper products, it's important to remember that this particular history was not universal. Across vast swathes of the globe, encompassing billions of people, the humble roll of toilet paper was, and often still is, secondary to a much older, perhaps arguably more effective method of cleaning: water. You journey now to different corners of the world, perhaps stepping into a bathroom in South Asia or the Middle East, or Southeast Asia, or parts of Africa. You might notice something missing, or at least less prominent than you're used to. While there might be a roll of paper present, sometimes used for drying or for guests unaccustomed to the local method, the primary tool for cleaning after using the toilet is water. This is a major mainstream fact often overlooked in Western narratives about hygiene history. Water remains the primary cleaning agent for a significant portion of humanity. The methods and tools vary by region, adapting to local plumbing and customs. In many parts of the Middle East and Asia, you'll find a spouted pot or jug near the toilet, an aftabay in Iran, a lata in India and Pakistan, and ibrik elsewhere. These are designed to hold water and allow for controlled pouring. You fill the pot, position it, and use your hand, again traditionally the left hand, in conjunction with the water to cleanse. The water washes away waste, leaving the skin feeling, proponents argue, far cleaner than wiping alone. You hear the gentle glug-glug of water being poured from the pot, a sound of simple, effective hygiene. Increasingly common in many of these regions and gaining popularity elsewhere is the handheld spray hose, sometimes called a bidet shower or health faucet. This is essentially a mini shower head on a hose, located next to the toilet. You use the spray to wash the area, often still aided by the hand. This provides a strong, direct stream of water and is seen as even more efficient and hygienic than the pot method. Imagine the directed spray of water, cool and cleansing. It's practical, effective, and requires no paper whatsoever for the primary cleaning. Then there is the bidet fixture itself, more common in parts of southern Europe like Italy, Spain, Portugal, and increasingly found in Latin America and luxury bathrooms in the West. This is a separate basin with taps or jets of water, or integrated into the toilet itself, a washlet. While the word bidet is French and the fixture developed in Europe, the concept of washing with water after using the toilet is ancient and central to hygiene in many non-European cultures. The bidet is, in a way, the Western plumbing system's answer to the water pot, or spray hose. You see the elegant bidet fixture and understand it as part of this global tradition of water-based cleaning. From the perspective of someone accustomed to using water, using only dry paper can seem insufficient. They might compare it to getting mud on your hands and just wiping it off with a tissue instead of washing them. The feeling of being truly clean, of having washed away all residue, is central to their understanding of hygiene. This creates a cultural divide, sometimes leading to humorous confusion when people from paper-centric cultures encounter bathrooms designed for water use, often searching desperately for a non-existent role. You imagine the moment of panic, the realization there's just a spray hose and no paper in sight. A gentle joke about the universal language of hygiene confusion. Historians still argue whether the strong preference for water in different cultures arose independently due to climate, resource availability, and early hygienic understandings, or if there were points of cultural exchange and influence that reinforced these practices across connected regions. It's likely a complex interplay of factors. A quirky tidbit might be reading accounts from early Western travelers encountering these water-based systems for the first time. Their reactions ranging from disgust to fascination, viewed through the lens of their own rag or nascent paper habits. The enduring prevalence of water-based cleaning highlights that while technology has offered new materials like paper, fundamental human needs can be met effectively through different means, shaped by culture, history, and environment. It's a reminder that our way isn't the only way, and that a simple, abundant resource like water can be the foundation of personal hygiene for billions. You hear the sound of running water, a universal symbol of cleanliness, and appreciate the deep historical and cultural roots of washing as the preferred method. As we reach the modern era, particularly in recent decades, our focus on hygiene has expanded beyond just personal cleanliness to include a growing awareness of our impact on the planet. The production and consumption of toilet paper, that soft, disposable luxury we became so accustomed to in the West, has come under scrutiny for its environmental footprint. You stand in the modern supermarket aisle, faced with not just choices of softness and ply count, but also claims of sustainability. You might see labels touting recycled, bamboo, or FSC certified. This reflects a growing concern about the environmental cost of traditional toilet paper, which is often made from virgin wood pulp. Producing this paper requires cutting down trees, consuming vast amounts of water and energy, and using various chemicals, including bleaches. Then there's the impact of transportation and the sheer volume of waste created when billions of people use and flush paper multiple times a day. This significant environmental cost is a mainstream fact that is driving innovation and changing consumer choices. In response, the market has seen a rise in eco-friendly toilet paper alternatives. Recycled toilet paper made from post-consumer waste paper reduces the need to cut down new trees and gives old paper a new life. It's often less soft than virgin fiber paper, but its environmental benefits are clear. Then there's bamboo toilet paper. Bamboo is a fast-growing grass, not a tree, and it often requires less water and no pesticides to grow, making it a more sustainable fiber source than wood pulp. You pick up a roll of bamboo TP, it might feel slightly different, perhaps a bit firmer, but you appreciate the thought of a rapidly renewable resource. Another trend, though one with a significant environmental downside, was the rise of flushable wet wipes. Marketed for extra cleanliness and convenience, these wipes caused major problems for sewage systems, clogging pipes and creating enormous solid masses known as fatbergs when they combined with grease and other waste. Despite being labeled flushable, Mina, many do not break down like toilet paper, leading to costly plumbing issues and environmental damage. This serves as a quirky tidbit, a modern example of a hygiene product with unforeseen, negative environmental consequences, contrasting with the intended simplicity and biodegradability of toilet paper. You imagine those poor sewer workers battling a giant wipe monster. Not exactly a gentle image for bedtime, but a real-world problem. Perhaps the most significant sustainable alternative, however, loops back to a practice we discussed earlier: water-based cleaning. Bidets, bidet attachments, and spray hoses, like those common in many parts of Asia and the Middle East, are gaining traction in paper-centric cultures precisely because they drastically reduce or even eliminate the need for toilet paper. Using water to clean, followed perhaps by a small amount of paper for drying, or even a dedicated towel, uses far fewer resources than relying solely on paper for cleaning. You see a sleek, modern bidet toilet seat and realize it's not just about perceived cleanliness, but about a conscious choice to reduce paper consumption and its associated environmental impact. The challenges in widespread adoption of eco-friendly TP, often slightly more expensive or less soft, and bidets, requiring plumbing changes, initial cost, and overcoming cultural habits, are real. People are accustomed to the convenience and feel of traditional toilet paper. Historians still argue whether the current trend towards eco-friendly options and bidets represents a fundamental, lasting shift in hygiene practices in the West, or if comfort and cost will continue to drive consumer choices. The true environmental footprint of different paper types, considering the entire life cycle from production to disposal, is also a subject of ongoing study and debate. So, as you consider the options in the modern bathroom, from the recycled roll to the bidet spray, you reflect on the evolving understanding of hygiene and its connection to the planet. We've come a long way from leaves and stones through rags and early paper to a point where we weigh softness and convenience against sustainability. The choice of how you clean yourself has, for some, become an environmental statement. You feel the texture of an eco-friendly paper, or imagine the cleansing spray of water, and consider the quieter, less impactful ways we are learning to manage this most basic of human needs. So, where does this long, often overlooked history of cleaning ourselves after using the toilet lead us? We've journeyed from handfuls of leaves and stones, through communal sponges, rough rags, imperial paper, water pots, corn cobs, and finally to the soft, sometimes colored, multi-ply rolls of the modern era, alongside the enduring and re-emerging popularity of water. What comes next? As we look to the future, several drivers seem poised to shape how we handle this essential task. Continued technological innovation, a growing imperative for environmental sustainability, an increasing focus on convenience and automation, and perhaps even greater integration with personal health monitoring. One likely path is the evolution of the bidet. Already sophisticated in some forms, like Japanese washlets with heated seats, adjustable water temperature and pressure, and air drying, future bidets could become even more advanced. Imagine systems with personalized settings stored for each user, self-cleaning nozzles using UV light or electrolysis, and perhaps even integrated air purification for the bathroom itself. The air drying function is particularly interesting. From a historical perspective, potentially eliminating the need for paper entirely. No more buying, storing, or disposing of rolls. You picture a sleek, minimalist toilet of the future, performing its functions almost silently, leaving you clean and dry with just the touch of a button, or maybe even a voice command. Beyond enhanced bidets, we might see completely integrated toilet systems that handle everything automatically. You use the facility, step away, and the toilet initiates a cleaning cycle for both itself and you, using water jets, perhaps some form of gentle cleanser and efficient drying. This moves towards a touchless, entirely automated process, maximizing convenience and potentially hygiene. Will there be mini robots involved? Probably not, but the idea of a toilet that does all the work for you has a certain futuristic appeal and perhaps a touch of lazy humor. Excuse me, Google, please initiate posterior sequence alpha. New materials could also emerge. While paper has dominated for over a century in some parts of the world, could biodegradable synthetic fibers be developed that offer the softness of paper but dissolve instantly in water, posing no threat to plumbing? Or perhaps advanced composites derived from waste materials that are even more sustainable than bamboo or recycled paper? The field of material science is constantly evolving, and it's not unreasonable to think that a material specifically optimized for this delicate balance of strength when needed and rapid biodegradability could be invented. Furthermore, the bathroom is increasingly seen as a potential hub for health monitoring. Future toilets might incorporate sensors that analyze waste for markers of disease, dietary deficiencies, or stress levels. If the toilet is already interacting with your body in that way, could it also integrate personal cleaning functions, perhaps even tailored based on immediate health data? Analysis complete. Initiating gentle anti-inflammatory wash cycle. It's a quirky, slightly unnerving thought, your toilet providing both cleaning and a health report. Experts debate whether the convenience and potential health benefits of such integrated systems will outweigh privacy concerns and the significant technological hurdles. The drive for sustainability will undoubtedly push towards solutions that use less water, perhaps advanced water recycling within the unit, and absolutely minimize solid waste. The environmental footprint of the toilet habit is now a recognized issue, a mainstream concern that will continue to influence design and technology. So, the future of cleaning up after using the toilet seems likely to involve more water, more technology, and less disposable paper. From the simple splash of a water pot to the targeted spray of a smart bidet, from a rough leaf to potentially a touchless, analytical cleansing system, the journey continues. The jury is still out on which specific technologies will become dominant globally, influenced by factors like cost, infrastructure, and cultural acceptance. But the fundamental need remains, driving innovation in unexpected directions. You've traveled through millennia of human history, explored diverse cultures, and pondered the future of a truly universal practice. From the quiet moments of necessity in ancient forests to the potential automated efficiency of a future smart bathroom, you've seen the ingenuity, the practicality, and sometimes the sheer strangeness of humanity's solutions to a very basic problem. The story of what people used before toilet paper and what they might use after is a quiet, constant thread running through the human experience. Now, as the journey through history slows and the thoughts of future technologies begin to fade, let your mind settle. The images of ancient leaves, Roman sponges, rustling paper, and gentle water sprays are drifting away. There's nothing more to figure out, nothing more to learn for tonight. Just the feeling of being still, in your own space, safe and comfortable. The sounds around you are softening. Your breathing is easing, becoming slower, deeper. Let the gentle rhythm of your breath carry you, dissolving any lingering thoughts, any worries. Just peace and quiet. Your body feels heavy, relaxed, sinking deeper into the surface beneath you. Everything is calm, everything is quiet. There's just the gentle darkness and the peace of rest settling over you. Allow yourself to drift completely, letting go, drifting into sleep.